MicroBrewr Podcast, Session 28.
Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast. Here's your host, Nathan Pierce.
Welcome to MicroBrewr Podcast. We talk about everything craft beer related with focus for people looking at starting their own microbreweries and wanting to take their existing breweries to the next level. I'm your host, Nathan Pierce. Thanks for listening, everybody. Hey, I wanted to mention this super cool thing. I got an email from Walt in South Africa. He says, thanks for the really informative show. And he said that the craft beer movement in South Africa is still gaining momentum. So it's neat to go behind the scenes in the U.S. craft beer industry. Thanks for emailing, Walt. That was really cool. It's always cool to get emails, and then from half a world away is even more cool. So if you're listening from outside of the U.S. and you have a favorite microbrewery that you'd like to hear on the show, let me know. Get them in touch with me. And you could tell them to send me an email, or if you want to send me an email directly with some contact info, at least their name and their website and stuff, send me a message at microbrewer.com/contact. And if you enjoy listening to the show, please subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher. And while you're in iTunes, please leave a review. I think iTunes has separate stores for different countries. So if you're outside of the US and you leave a comment, I might not get to see it, but still it helps with the searches, and it's just cool to know that there's people out there commenting, even if I might not see it. I just checked the iTunes store and I saw that Nick at 5 Minutes with Dad left a comment on September 10th. He said, really interesting stuff. Love it! ! And on September 13th, Gary at Breakthrough Cocktail said, this is a great podcast for all those looking to get more info and inspiration on homebrewing. And then Matt McWilliams left a comment on September 17th saying, very impressed, Nathan. Keep bringing it. I will keep bringing it. I love doing this podcast. It's a lot of fun. And I've already recorded a few episodes ahead. So there's some really good episodes coming up. I talk with a retail person to give us tips on working with retailers to sell more beer. And I talked with a consultant doing accounting and operations consulting for breweries. And she gave us like tons of good information. And there's a couple more brewery interviews in the can too. So I'm looking to keep bringing more episodes of MicroBrewr, and I thank everybody for listening, and thank you for the comments. And if you enjoy it, please leave a review. I always appreciate the feedback, and I'm looking to hear your opinions on how I can improve the show too. And it does help with searches. It helps rank us higher in the iTunes store every time you leave a rating and review, so that other people who are looking for the podcast can find it easier. And it's always cool to see comments on the show notes too. Every episode has a web page on the MicroBrewr website. So this episode has show notes at microbrewer.com/session28. That has all the resources mentioned in this episode. In this episode, I talk with Elise Lane from Scarlett Lane Brewing Company in McCordsville, Indiana. Elise spent some time on the West Coast in Oregon, and she drank a beer in Bend, Oregon that changed her life. When she asked to talk with the brewer, she was surprised to hear that a lady brewed the beer. So it totally blew her mind, and she started looking more into it. And she studied fermentation sciences with the American Brewers Guild. And then she moved back to her home state and started a brewery. So now she's the CEO. Other women have invested in the company, and the president is a woman. So they're on their website, it says that they're repaving the way for females in craft beer, which Elise gives us more details about, more in depth in the story. She tells us behind the scenes of the history of beer and women in beer and men in beer. We don't go too much into that. She has a lot of good information just on running a good brewery. So here's the interview. Hey, Elise, I introduced you to the listeners. Let's take a few minutes and you can tell us more about you and your brewery.
Hi, I am Elise Lane. I am the head brewer and CEO for Scarlett Lane Brewing Company. And we are a brewery in Indianapolis, Indiana, actually McCordsville. It's a small little town just outside of Indianapolis.
So how did you get started?
I started brewing beer in my kitchen about 8 years ago. I had a tiny little pot on my stove, and I just got hooked after that. And I started going and buying more and more equipment and asking if I could brew with friends at their breweries. And my husband saw that I was really into it. And so he recommended that I should go ahead and try to do something with it since I seemed so happy. So I decided I was going to do that. And for me, the best way to do that was to continue to brew in other breweries. And then also I went back to school with the American Brewers Guild, and I studied fermentation sciences and how to do this the right way.
Where's the Brewers Guild at?
It's in Vermont.
You had to go and do that. How long of a program is that?
It was, let's see, it's about 7 months, and you do a portion of your studies at home. You watch lectures, you take tests, you work with mentors to help you through some of the classes, and then you go to Vermont and you go through practical exams, and you brew on premise, and then you graduate, and hopefully you know enough to be dangerous.
Be dangerous. So tell me about making beer in your kitchen in a little pot. Because I've made beer with a couple friends, and it's like a 5-gallon batch, and I've heard about the tiny pot kitchen kind of thing, but I've not really heard anything more than that.
I decided that I was going to try to brew something, and so I went to our local brew shop in Eugene, Oregon, where I was living at the time, at Valley Vintner, and I said, I want to try something. I don't know if I'm going to like it or not. How do I get started? And they said, all right, we're going to start you out as all grain. We didn't even start at extract. And they taught me how to do it on my stovetop. It was a very, very small batch, but it turned out pretty well. It was beer, and I got hooked after that.
What's small, like a gallon or something?
Yeah, it was, let's see here. It was 3 gallons.
That's a big pot.
It was, I cook a portion of it, and then I had to add water from a second pot. So I had 2 pots going at the same time.
Wow.
But it got through.
So how long were you using that system before you decided that you wanted to drink more beer?
I was probably using that for about 6 months. And then that's when I graduated to my turkey fryer, and I started brewing outside on my turkey fryer.
Whoa. Turkey fryer is that thing that is basically like a big old pot of cooking oil, and you're supposed to like deep fry your turkey, right?
Right. Exactly. And so that's what I would do my mash in, is just this big pot outside and it was a turkey fryer, and it was advertised as that.
Oh my gosh.
So it was fun to get outside and start using that.
Did you already have that, or did you buy it just for making beer?
I bought it to make beer.
Oh, wow. How many gallons was that one?
That's when I moved up to 5 gallons.
The turkey fryer is 5 gallons?
Yes.
Okay, so tell us more about Scarlet Lane Brewing Company now. Like, where are you located? What are your products and things like that?
All right. We are in McCordsville, Indiana, which is just outside of Indianapolis. And we are a production facility. I brew in on a 15-barrel system into 30-barrel fermenters and brights. And we make a wide range of products. I really think that right now, where we are in Indiana with the craft beer scene, that you need to be approachable, yet interesting and different. And so I like to brew one beer is a red IPA, and I like to balance out the big hoppy Northwest flavors of those hops with some caramel back. So that's why we made that a red. And so it's a nice balance. We also have a pale ale that we're playing around with, where I'm using some really unique and different types of hops that we haven't really been experiencing yet. And I love using experimentals. And then we have my Stout, which is my sweet, sweet baby, Dorian. And Dorian is always going to be a Stout, but it's always evolving. And so when we first launched, we had Dorian as a coconut Stout. And the coconut Stout went really well, but he's now evolving, and he is now a oatmeal Stout. And he will be changing again, I'm certain. And then we also have Silas, who is our Saison. And that's something that we've Americanized a little bit for Saison and added a little bit of more of a hop to it and balanced out some of the interesting yeast esters that we get from the Belgian yeast. And then I like to play around with some side products, and I like using all natural products that are going to be adjuncts. So we had a beer that came out recently that was a all-natural California organic peach beer. It was very light, like a peach flower, as opposed to being a very large, big, fruity beer. But it gave it a nice layer and interesting texture. And then I also recently used white peony tea in one of our beers. And I like experimenting with teas as well. I think it can really give an interesting level to your beer.
Wow, how much caffeine comes from that?
The flowers that I use, this tea, it's non-caffeinated, so there is no caffeine in that beer. I actually gave up caffeine about a year ago, so I'm conscious of that.
Well, one thing that came to mind when you mentioned that, it sounds like it's not an issue for you guys. I can't remember which movie I saw on Netflix. It's like the history of beer or something like that, at least in the U.S. Maybe it was just called craft beer. I don't know. It followed a few different brewers, like craft brewers, who were, I think, trying to break into the business. And one person, not even sure that she was brewing, but she had a caffeinated alcoholic beverage. And I think at the end of the story, like in the final credits, they said that it was deemed to be illegal, so she wasn't allowed to sell it. Have you heard about anything like that?
No, I haven't. That's interesting, though. I'll have to check that out.
I'm going to have to look it up. If I find the video, I'll send you an email or something, and I'll put it in the show notes if I can find it too.
Absolutely.
So, but it's really interesting to hear you talk about your beers, because when I was checking them out on the website, I don't know if it's like, I wouldn't call it necessarily a story per se, but you really describe these things in detail and almost personify your beers. You're even talking about them like him and whatnot.
I do. I spend a lot of time with these beers, and I feel like they have personalities and that they're unique. And with our naming convention for our beers, using proper names for them, such as Vivian and Dorian and Silas, they become real to me, and I can see them as being a person.
Do you have mostly male beers and only one female beer?
We have another lady that will be coming out pretty soon. Scarlett Lane is named after a female character. Actually, it's kind of funny. Our entire brewery is based around literature in some ways. Scarlet was Scarlett O'Hara from Gone with the Wind. I read that when I was very, very young, and it really stuck with me how strong she was and how just she had this power and conviction and knew what she was going to do, and was a very powerful woman, and I thought that was beautiful. And so I named my dog Scarlet, and she lived with our or three of the founders, Doug Sheets, Nick Surveys, and then myself. And she lived with us for a long time. And when we were talking about starting the business, we decided that it should be named after Scarlett, who was a character herself. And then once we had Scarlett Lane there, it just made sense that we should follow other literary references. And so I looked into and I thought about, who are my favorite characters in books and how can that personify what I'm trying to share with people. And I worked quite a bit with Nick Surveys on this, on crafting the tale and pairing it up with what my beer is going to be.
I saw that you're a fan of Oscar Wilde.
I am. As a matter of fact, last night I went on a literary pub crawl and I dressed up as Dorian Gray. So I'm a big fan. He's incredibly witty and has a great sense of humor and just wrote just beautifully and really was able to paint tales with his words. And it was so vivid. And so it was very fun for us to be able to have our Dorian Stout, which is a Dorian Gray, which was always changing and different, and you didn't know what was going to happen. So it was fun to be able to do that with our Stout.
And I found out about your brewery from one of the listeners who's emailing once in a while, Hayden Little. He's also trying to start a brewery in Indiana. And he said you have a great story to tell. And he said that Scarlett Lane is the only brewery owned by a woman in Indiana.
We are, there are two other nano breweries, very small breweries that are in northern Indiana that have female owners. We are the only female-owned, or the first female-owned production brewery in Indiana. And it's exciting to be able to start something. And all of our investors, except for one, are women. And then I'm the brewer, and I'm also the CEO. And then Monica Kerrigan is our president. And so we have a lot of women that work with us and support us. And we think it's important that more women get into the business and into the industry, and not just in the brewing, but also in all facets. And I think it's great that we can help inspire other women and work with them to make sure that they can find a path into something that has been male-dominated for such a long time.
Yeah, I don't think there's any denying that. And it's interesting. I'll just read something from your website. It says, "It was at one time illegal for males to brew beer. We intend to respect that history with our beer designs, our marketing, our branding, and our operations. Scarlett Lane is excited to be repaving the way for females in the industry." What's up with that? Like going as far back as when it was illegal for males to brew beer. Tell us a little bit about that. I know a little bit of the story because a friend of mine, Christina Sierra, has been researching a lot of that, but I want to hear your perspective too.
Yeah, if you go back in history and you look at women in brewing, it's been a rocky road for ladies. It all started out for me. The reason I started researching this is I drank a beer in Bend, Oregon, a long time ago now. And I asked, it just really struck me. It was the first beer that I ever said, this really has changed me. And I asked if I could speak with the brewer, and they said, "I'm sorry, she's not here today." And something just hit me. Oh, there are female brewers out there? And I don't know what it was, but in that moment, it just really made an impact. So I decided, I'm a nerd, I was going to go and read about it and learn more about women in the brewing industry to see if this was something like I can do too. And so I started reading, Ninkasi. We have our great goddess of beer. We had women in medieval times and before were the ones that were in charge of making beer because they were already involved with food production. And then you move further in, and it was thought that it would be bad luck or that something would happen to the beer if a man touched it. And what that was related to is the idea that men didn't have the same palates to be able to taste poisons, and that women's had that stronger palate to be able to taste those poisons. So when they were adding different things into the beer, there were instances where men would make beer because they weren't familiar with the different substances that were used out there for cooking or production, and they had killed people. So it became a little bit of a little story where people were afraid that something bad would happen. So that was handed over to the women.
Wow.
And women continued to craft beer for quite a long time until we got into Prohibition, and then we go into the wars, and then it became much more of an industry that was a big business. And that's where women started taking over the entire business again. And it went on for quite a bit of time, and now you see a lot of brilliant women that are brewers, business owners, marketing, and legal services in the brewing industry. And it's fantastic to see the women coming back into it.
Definitely. Diversity is good. So, sometimes, I don't know, this is turning really personal right now because sometimes some of my friends want to go like on a camping trip or an outing or whatever, and they'll be like, no, it's a guys only weekend. And I actually don't like those weekends as much as I like having women around. Guys get kind of crazy when it's only men around. So I'm glad more women are coming into the beer industry. And I'm wondering your opinion on how that's going to affect the demographic from the consumer point of view too. I saw recently, it came out in last December. Geez, I can't believe it's almost December again, but it came out in December 2013 from the Brixton Beer Bulletin. It was an infographic of who the craft beer drinker is, and it said women make up 25% of the beer market, the overall beer market, but just 4.4% of the craft beer market.
Right.
What percentage of women do you think are customers of Scarlett Lane?
I see quite a few women that come into our brewery, and what's interesting to me is we make beers that are going to be approachable, like I said earlier, and we want to be able to educate the consumer on what they're drinking and understanding what it is that they like, and maybe an alcoholic beverage of a different variety. So what do you like about a wine? What do you like about a liqueur? What is it that makes you happy? And then we can translate that and explain some of the notes and the different flavors, so it's not just an explosion of something. And so I have a lot of women that will come in, and we explain to them, this is a stout. Well, I don't like something dark. I'm like, just give it a taste, see what you think. Here's a little bit of a note on it. And then a lot of times they will buy a stout and be happy with it. And I'll have a lot of people that are like, I never thought I would like this kind of beer, but now that I understand it, I'm wanting more of it. And I think that's something that's really important. And I think that we're able to do that and help people out with that.
So sometimes you'll just transition somebody from mass-produced beer straight in, just take them all the way headfirst to the stout.
Well, I do, because I love stouts.
Nice.
But I will. And a lot of times, it's okay if you don't like it, and I understand that, and then I can take you over to maybe a pale ale or take you over to our saison, and maybe that's going to be what you want. But I usually do use a stout as an introductory because there's a lower bitterness in that beer.
Oh.
And so I find that there is a little bit of a standoff feeling about big IPAs and diving right into that.
Yeah,
and so
sure.
I find something lower in the IBUs and something that's going to be a little bit smoother is a nice introductory point.
Totally. Yeah, you can't jump into the IPA either. It took my palate a while to be able to accept the IPA.
Right. And it does. It's like, what I think of is when I started liking blue cheese. I hated blue cheese as a child. I didn't understand it, and I thought everybody that was an adult and ate it was crazy. But now I love it, and I seek out all kinds of different flavors because my palate has evolved, and I now appreciate those different flavors. And it's the same way with beer.
Well, speaking of flavors and stouts and whatnot, I was surprised to hear you mention the coconut stout earlier. I'm I'm disappointed to hear that you're moving away from that, because I love coconut milk, like in my cereal and even in hot chocolate and stuff.
Right.
Hopefully I'll get to try a coconut stout someday.
It will come back. And I know it will. People have really, really embraced that beer, and they love it. But I had always wanted Dorian to be something that's going to evolve and always have a different face. And so it'll go through phases, and new things will come in, and some may not come back, but I know that coconut's going to come back.
Awesome. Can you send me a bottle?
I probably can.
Sweet. Well, we better move on. Thanks for broadening the picture about what Scarlett Lane Brewing is all about. Now let's get focused. And Elise, I like to go real deep, real fast. I hope you're okay with that.
All right, let's do it.
Tell us the biggest mistake you've ever made as a brewer or as a brewery owner now.
Early on, we had an issue where we compromised what our vision was going to be. We had an idea of what our brewery should be and where it should be, and we decided to move into a property that just was not right for us, and we were moving forward on it. And luckily, were able to move out of that. And it was difficult, but we knew that it just wasn't who we are. And so compromising on what your vision is for even your property, your ideals, how you're moving forward, it just can't be done. And luckily, we were able to correct it, like I said, but it's scary if you ever go down that path.
What was so different about the property?
It was it was a little bit smaller. It was in the city proper, and it just didn't have the open flow and the ability for growth and the space to do things outside and kind of turn the world into an adult playland for us. And so it wasn't who we were. And we even wrote in our business plan that we wanted to be somewhere spacious that we could grow into. And luckily, like I said, again, we moved out of there and we found this beautiful property that we're now on.
Sounds like you wasted some time and maybe money too, but you corrected that problem. So if you could start your brewery over again, what would you do differently to do it better?
Not compromise on what we spent so much time developing. It took us about 2 years to write our business plan and really understand where our direction was going. And then we made a foolish mistake and didn't follow our own words. And so it's always sticking to what you want to do and what you really believe in, and making snap decisions that are going to be easier. And the easy way is not always going to be the right way.
So let's go to the other side of the spectrum. What's the best idea you've ever had for your business?
I think the best idea that I've ever had for this business is making sure that we're going to be approachable and accessible to all different levels of people that are interested in beer, or maybe not even initially interested in beer, and appealing to both men and women alike, and not, pushing in one direction, understanding that there's a large market out there and that we can appeal to both of them with the same basic understanding of our company and basic ideas of marketing.
So you were tempted to market to a smaller niche at first?
There were some ideas of potentially doing that very early on. And you can see that a lot of times in naming conventions where it's, super jumbo hop monster, things like that, where it's just really big and bold and in your face. And we decided to go with something that was going to be a little bit more refined and that was going to be able to appeal to people on different levels instead of just going in one direction.
Well, your brewery's just been opened since May this year, right?
Yes.
It's kind of early on, but has there been a moment when you realize that you finally succeeded? Or if you're still looking forward to that, how are you going to define it?
Some days I think, is it going to come? Is it going to come? And then other days I find these little moments of bliss where I'll be out to dinner and I'll hear somebody order a Scarlett Lane beer. And I'm like, how do they know about that? Why are they talking about that? And then I'm like, oh, that's right. This is real now. And it's just little moments that catch you, and you just really have to be happy about those moments. And that's success to me, is just finding joy and making sure that other people enjoy it with you.
So what did you do when you were sitting down in a restaurant and the next table over, they order some of your beer? Did you tell them it was yours?
Oh, no. I turn around really quick and I look at them. I'm like, are they drinking it? Are they sending it back? What's happening? And then I go back to having my dinner and enjoying myself. But it's just a little thrill to hear somebody order something that you spent so much time on and that you've really held close to your heart for so long.
Yeah, I'll bet. I'd be like totally watching their face. Oh no, I hope they like it. Actually, it would be like, I hope they don't hate it.
Right? Yeah, there are moments that happens. Other times it's just exciting that someone wants to try it.
So that's a pretty neat memory. And my next question is, do you have a favorite memory since opening the brewery?
I think the first time hearing somebody order my beer is one of the great memories. And then another thing is Nick and Doug, the two other guys that I started this idea with. They came in and brewed with me, and neither one of them are very interested on the production side. But they ended up coming in and spending time with me in the brewery and acting as my assistants. And it was really fun to be able to brew with them and see them work through the entire process and really put some of their blood, sweat, and tears into something that we were going to give to everybody.
Awesome. So there are people out there listening who want to do what you have done. What could you tell an aspiring home brewer that is the most important thing for them to start doing tomorrow if they want to start a brewery?
Start reading. I'm a big fan of reading. Any book you can get your hands on, and start going to breweries and asking if you can spend time in their brewery and look around and understand what they're doing. It has really been a fortune for us that we had a lot of friends in the brewing industry, and we've kept very open lines of communication and just asking questions, always asking questions. And you'll find that this industry, we all want to help each other out, and we want to see everybody succeed. And that's something great because it's a big family. And so just join that family and see if this is something that you really want to do.
Well, now we have a question from one of our listeners. Orlando left a comment on one of our show notes on episode 23, and he asks, how did you move from home brewing to a larger scale? Like, how do you do recipe conversions to a larger scale, and how do you get hop contracts, yeast storage, and propagation?
It's a task. I'll tell you that to start out with. Moving into the production scale, scaling recipes for me, it's something that I have some spreadsheets that I work on. And then I also sit down and do old-fashioned hand and calculator math, which I learned at American Brewers Guild. And then also some of it I've captured from other brewers that I've spoken with. So on recipe conversions, that's what I do. And then also with contracts are hard. Go ahead.
Could I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
So do you just, if you have a 5-gallon batch and you want to make a 15-barrel batch, do you just scale it? Like, do you just multiply it? Or do you have to adjust things?
You have to adjust. And sometimes you can scale it up, and that'll give you a good basic start. If you know what your percentages are going to be, you can scale it up using those percentages. There are times, though, where you need to look at what your yield is going to be, your brewing efficiency is going to be, and that's when I use calculators that I've created and have gotten from other brewers.
And hop contracts is interesting. I don't know if I read somewhere online in like a forum, or it might have actually been in an email to Joe Shellerud, the first host of this podcast. He hosted this podcast up to episode 12. Somebody said that he was trying to start a brewery and he was planning to start a brewery and was anticipating that. So he actually contracted with some hops wholesalers, I guess, and actually never even ended up starting a brewery, so I guess he was locked in with these hops and didn't know what to do.
Oh my gosh.
So how would a smaller brewery just get going approach somebody for getting hops?
We have contracted and we've done spot purchases through brokers. We've also gone directly to farms and asked farmers if we could purchase directly through them. There are a couple different ways to do that. You just have to find the right brokerage to work with, the right house. And something that's exciting for us is there are a lot of new hop farms that are popping out here in Indiana. And while they haven't been able to get, to their growing years yet, they're in their first and second year and usually don't want to use a hop until it's 3 to 5 years old. They are starting brokerages here where they're contracting specifically with farmers in New Zealand, in Australia, in the Northwest. And so it's been nice to work with these smaller brokerages that are creating different types of relationships, and we're able to get small amounts through those.
Well, I chose this question for you specifically because you came from doing the 3-gallon batches on your kitchen to the larger scale now. Is there any other recommendations that you can make to a home brewer that's going to be scaling up pretty soon?
I think start those conversations with hop brokers and also with the area that you're going to be getting your grains from. Start those early on and kind of understand what those contracts are going to look like and that you're going to be purchasing an entire year ahead. So right now I'm in contracts for 2016 and 2017 already. And that's something that you don't necessarily know when you're first going into this. And it's hard that first year if you're going to do spot purchases and buy whatever's left over and that hasn't been contract, you may be limited on what you're going to brew. So start those conversations very early on in your planning.
Oh, you might not be able to get the hops that you want.
Right. Very likely you won't be able to get the hops that you want.
Wow. Okay, so listeners, if you have a question for one of our future guests, go ahead and hit me up on Twitter at MicroBrewr. And Facebook is MicroBrewr also. And there's a contact form that you can email me directly from the website. It's microbrewr.com/contact. And go ahead, send me a message of a question that you want to ask one of the future guests. And now, Elise, it's time for happy hour. The next set of questions are a little lighter. We're going to get to know each other a little better, have some fun, and get inside the industry. Are you ready?
All right.
Cans or bottles?
Bottles.
That's it?
Hey, you asked cans or bottles. Bottles.
It seems like... Go for it. There's something about a bottle that it just feels right for me. I know that cans are great. I drink from a can, craft from can, and it's good beer. It's a good way to do it. But for me personally, I'm looking forward to bottling. I just feel like it matches what we're doing. It's so interesting. I was pushing you on that one because it's kind of funny that the can people feel like they have to explain themselves, but the few people who say bottles, they're just like bottles.
Yeah.
And I've actually had some emails from some of the listeners. They're like, why didn't you follow up on that?
Yeah, when you are a bottle fan, you are just a bottle fan.
No need to explain.
Yeah, it's just something I think that you have in you. And I'll take it a step further. I like bombers. I love 22s.
Okay, so what's the most challenging beer that you've ever made?
Oh, the most challenging beer I've made. I think, that coconut stout, making sure that it came out the way that I wanted it and it didn't come out sweet. That was a lot of trial and some error to make sure that it came out well. And I fought the mash on those a few times.
Oh, wow. Had to start over a few times, huh?
Oh, yeah. When you look at giant grain bills like that stout takes, you can fight that mash quite a bit. And then also figuring out the right amount of coconut so that it complements the beer and doesn't overwhelm the beer. And that took a lot of trial right there.
Man, you're making me thirsty talking about this coconut stout again. It reminds me of Arbor Brewing, who I interviewed a couple episodes past, because I drink coconut milk with my chai also, and they have a chai IPA at their brewery in India. I asked them to send me a bottle of that too.
I love chai beers. I think they're wonderful. I've really enjoyed a couple that have come out, and I think I love it. You know, I don't know if I'm going to put my toes in that water, but I love chai beers.
Well, I hadn't heard of it before Arbor mentioned it, so it's kind of a thing, huh?
Yeah, I think it's becoming a little bit more of a thing. It's pretty good.
I'll look for
it. It's a good thing.
So if you were going to make a 5-gallon batch at home this weekend, what beer would you make?
Right now, I would do something that's probably going to be a brown. I've been playing with some brown recipes recently, and so it's something that I'm enjoying. I think that it's something that's not really appreciated or done anymore as much, because we've all gone towards big hoppy beers, or we're finding something that's going to be more subtle. And I see a lot of saisons coming out right now too, and so I'm trying to bring back the brown.
Bring back the brown. So that's actually segueing to my next question. Tell me one beer style that you think will be gaining more attention.
Hopefully, maybe a brown. I think that, there are a lot of different styles of browns out there, and you can play with them quite a bit. You know, you can have the English browns that are going to be very mild. You can have these new Americanized browns that are going to have lots of different flavors. And it also really imports itself to using different types of grains that are going to really highlight different flavors from those grains. So I think it's something fun to play with.
Can you suggest a book for our audience that will help them succeed in opening a brewery?
A book that I really like is Brewing Up a Business by Kellyanne. He really hits the nail on the head, and I'll catch myself thinking back to that book as I'm going through the process of starting my own business and going, yep, he said that, he did that, he's doing well, so I'm going in the right direction.
Yep, that's the number one book mentioned in this podcast. And listeners, if you want to check out all of the books mentioned, there's a page that compiles them all together. It's at microbrewer.com/book list. But we'll mention this book and all the other links in the show notes for this episode. Now, Elise, give us one last piece of advice for someone who just brewed the first batch at their new brewery, and then we'll close up the brew house for the night.
Enjoy a glass of your own beer. Sit down and be happy that you're doing something that you love and that you're going to be able to share it with others.
Fantastic. Thanks for taking the time, Elise.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for sharing the tips on starting and operating your new brewery for everybody else too. So tell us how we can stay in touch with you, and then we'll set this episode aside to ferment.
All right. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course you can check in our beers on Untapped. And we also have a website, scarletlanebrew.com.
Thanks again, Elise Lane, for being on MicroBrewr Podcast. That was a lot of fun. Thanks for sharing your stories and your advice and tips about starting and operating a successful brewery. So I looked up that movie that I was talking about. It was Beer Wars. You could check it out at beerwarsmovie.com. And that's the one where they talk about Moonshot, alcoholic beverage product. It was beer that had caffeine added to it, and it was actually later shut down by the FDA. I put a link to that in the show notes, and I also put a link to this article, Mass Market, FDA's Move is Last Call for Local Beer Company. by John Chesto on the Patriot Lager. So what they said was that if your beer is made with coffee or tea, it's okay. But if your beer has straight caffeine added during the manufacturing process, then that's not allowed. So heads up, if you're making beer out there and adding straight up caffeine to it, no good. But coffee stout, chai IPA, those things that we love, that's okay, I guess. And I also added in the show notes a couple of links to just a couple of beer, women beer bloggers that I found just by Googling as sort of a starting off point to a discussion. I want to see some more comments in the show notes about women in craft beer and other beer bloggers and resources that you guys think the rest of us would like to see. And thank you all to the listeners. Also, I really appreciate your comments on the website, emails, and tweets and stuff. You could go ahead and send me a message anytime. MicroBrewr Podcast is on Twitter and Facebook at MicroBrewr. And I'm also on Untapped at Nathan Pierce, Pierce. So don't forget to subscribe in iTunes or Stitcher if you like the show. That'll make sure that you get every episode downloaded right away when it comes out. And please check out the show notes for the resources I mentioned earlier and all the other good stuff that we mentioned in this episode. Scarlett Lane Brewing Company is on there. I have all the contact information for them, and you get in touch with them and thank Elise for being on the podcast. Let her know that you appreciate her sharing her information and advice on starting a successful brewery. That's at microbrewer.com/session28. All the show notes are at microbrewer.com, and the one for this episode is at microbrewer.com/session28. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, support your local brewery, and we will see you next week.
Thanks for listening to MicroBrewr Podcast with Nathan Pierce. We'll see you right here next time at microbrewer.com.
If you want more resources for starting a craft brewery, check out microbrewer.com, microbrewer.com. If you want to become a Cicerone certified beer server, check out beerexamschool.com for free study guide and flashcards for the certified beer server exam. beerexamschool.com.